The House Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Oversight and Management Efficiency, and the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Subcommittee on Regulatory Affairs and Federal Management will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to examine failures at the U.S. Secret Service and their implications government-wide. The Chair recognizes himself for an opening statement. In September, the DHS Office of Inspector General, the OIG, released a report on its 4-month-long investigation into improper access and distribution of information within the Secret Service. The findings were alarming. Widespread violations of the Privacy Act and agency policy occurred by Secret Service employees who accessed and distributed information on a member of Congress's past employment application, and senior management did nothing immediately to stop it. Inspector General John Ross stated that the episode was deeply disturbing. In addition, Director Clancy announced he had a different account of what he initially told OIG. Investigators subsequently had to re-interview Director Clancy and issue an addendum to the report. This incident leaves numerous questions unanswered. How did this happen? Why did Secret Service leadership not act? And why and how did Director Clancy change his account almost immediately after the IG's report was released? The American people deserve answers. DHS must hold all employees involved appropriately accountable. As disturbing as this incident is, it is only one example of other instances where Secret Service employees showed very poor judgment and leadership failed to act. Earlier this year, senior agents who may have been under the influence of alcohol compromised an area at the White House being investigated for a suspicious package. Director Clancy was, again, not immediately informed. Late last year, OIG also reported about a 2011 incident where agents were diverted to investigate an incident at the home of the director's assistant, which appeared to be a misuse of agency resources and violation of the Federal Employee Code of Ethics. The findings in the IG's latest report are yet another example of damage to the American people's trust in the Secret Service. When scandal after scandal emerges and management is ill-informed or fails to act, the American people have cause for great concern. We entrust the Secret Service with tremendous authorities and tools. When they abuse those authorities, they violate their contract with the American people. Because of the service's recent failures, DHS Secretary Jay Johnson convened a panel of experts late last year to recommend changes to improve the service. The panel made broad recommendations in December 2014 related to training and personnel, perimeter security, technology and operation, and leadership. The panel's report provided a broad roadmap to begin reforming the service. I expect Director Clancy to fully explain today what progress has been made in implementing the panel's recommendations. While Congress has a responsibility to conduct rigorous oversight of the latest incident, we must also understand what is being done to improve the overall management of the Secret Service. I am also concerned that similar abuses and shortcomings could occur in other federal law enforcement agencies. It is important to understand what policies and safeguards, if any, are in place to prevent similar abuse, regardless of whether it's as a member of Congress or one of our constituents back home. If it happened at the service, what's to say other federal agencies are any better? Today's hearing must be about more than pointing fingers. The American people have high expectations, as they should, for the Secret Service and want the agency to be successful. Their mission is absolutely critical to our nation's well-being, and as we saw from excellent work by Secret Service personnel during the papal visit and United Nations General Assembly, the service can succeed with proper focus and leadership. I look forward to hearing more from our witnesses on how the Secret Service can best overcome recent obstacles to improve the management and reform the culture of this critical agency. The Chair now recognizes the Chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Subcommittee on Regulatory Affairs and Federal Management, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lankford, for his statement.
Chairman Perry, thank you very much. Thanks for holding this joint hearing with our subcommittee as well. Good morning, everyone. I'm trying to think of a more awkward situation than how we're currently seated here. I'm sure there is a way if we were in a separate room. We're so far away from each other on this panel setting. But I do appreciate everyone here, and hopefully this will be an open dialogue as we walk through this process together. I do hope this also sheds some important light on the situation where we are not with the Secret Service, but government-wide. At the outset, I would like to acknowledge the essential role that Secret Service fills and its incredible dedication to our country. We do appreciate very much the service that Secret Service brings to our nation and what it has done historically and what it continues to do. However, recent history of high-profile and embarrassing scandals of the Secret Service and the latest DHS Inspector General findings of wrongdoing can't be swept under the rug, as I know Secret Service is not doing. IG's investigation reveals unauthorized database searches of protected information began during a House Oversight and Government Reform hearing in March of this year. In the days that followed, many of the Secret Service continued to misuse their authority to access the sensitive employment history of Chairman Jason Chaffetz. The IG's report noted that 60 instances of unauthorized access to the database by 45 Secret Service employees that violated the Privacy Act, excuse me, as well as an internal and DHS policies. The report also noted that 18 senior Secret Service executives failed to stop the unauthorized access or inform Director Clancy about the unauthorized accesses. In fairness, the report does reflect that one special agent instructed her subordinates to cease accessing the database. On its face, such widespread violations of our law and the public's trust are deeply disturbing. The IG did not question those involved if this was the only time they have inappropriately used the database. In the Internet age, everyone is concerned about the possibility that personal information could be stolen or misused. Our elite law enforcement agencies are not above the law, and those responsible must face appropriate consequences. But to me, there is a much bigger issue. In these days, millions of Americans' personal data is stored across many government agencies. A GAO report released earlier this year on the government's federal information security showed alarming findings. From 2009 to 2014, the number of information security incidents involving personally identifiable information reported by federal agencies has more than doubled. GAO has stated that many agencies have largely failed to fully implement the hundreds of recommendations previously made to remedy security control vulnerabilities. These security weaknesses continue to exist in the protection of significant personal data of millions of Americans housed by the IRS, HHS, the VA, and other agencies. Just this month, the Social Security Administration's Office of the Inspector General released a report showing that the Social Security Administration paid monetary awards to 50 employees who were previously discovered to have accessed personal information of others without authorization. 50 federal employees who accessed the personal information of others without authorization, yet incredibly, in the end, they were rewarded despite breaking the law. In another troublesome example, the Senate Homeland Security Committee received testimony this year that a whistleblower was retaliated against for shedding light on inadequate suicide prevention practices at a VA hospital. This whistleblower learned that VA employees illegally and improperly accessed his private medical records after he brought to light the shameful behavior occurring at the VA hospital where he served. The question is now, how do we fix this problem so that Americans believe that government will protect their information and not use it for nefarious means? I'm hopeful today we can take a step forward to address this issue, and would like to thank Director Clancy, Inspector General Roth, and Mr. Williamson for their testimony today. I look forward to examining these challenges with each of you.
Chair now recognizes the ranking minority member of the House Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Oversight and Management Efficiency, the gentlelady from New Jersey, Mrs. Watson Coleman, for her statement.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Langford and Ranking Member Heitkamp for holding today's hearings. Director Clancy, I want to first extend my condolences in person on the loss of your father. Director, Inspector General Roth, and Mr. Williamson, I thank you for your testimony. I also want to thank the men and women of the Secret Service for their diligence and hard work during the recent papal visit and the 70th anniversary of the United Nations General Assembly. As a member of the Committee on Homeland Security and the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, I am well aware of the gravity of the Secret Service's mission, particularly regarding its duty to protect the President, along with foreign dignitaries, and to oversee security at major events domestically and abroad. While I am confident that the overwhelming majority of the men and women of the Secret Service both take their job seriously and express the highest grade of professionalism, I am appalled by the recent reports of operational lapses and poor judgment by senior level management. It is obvious that there is a widespread lack of consistent leadership and management within Secret Service. However, this did not just begin under Director Clancy's leadership. These issues have plagued the Secret Service for a number of years. Last year, Secretary Johnson commissioned the independent panel to evaluate the Secret Service. According to the panel's report, the Secret Service needed to undergo a cultural change, and that included having leadership that was capable of fostering greater accountability among all staff, of modernizing administrative functions, including adjusting the hours special agents and uniformed division personnel must work, and improving their training. After the panel dismantled, the Inspector General continued to corroborate their findings. In 2015 alone, the Inspector General has issued 2 memoranda regarding misconduct among senior Secret Service personnel and 2 management advisories. The most recent management advisory was issued on October the 21st, when personnel were found sleeping on the job. The Inspector General found that staffing and scheduling practices of the Secret Service contributes to officer fatigue, and that this could pose immediate danger to protectees. Instead of addressing the root of the problem of having overworked agents, the Secret Service considered the findings an isolated incident. Furthermore, the Inspector General's most recent management advisory on improper database access at the Secret Service shows that the agency has a deeply rooted cultural problem that is not being addressed. The Inspector General found that over 40 agents improperly accessed the personnel records of a member of Congress through an antiquated database. According to the Inspector General's findings, Secret Service leadership, including the director and the deputy director, did not recognize the severity of the situation and dismiss that data breach as a rumor. The Inspector General found that instead of dealing with this situation, the director of the Secret Service discussed the improper database access with former directors at a luncheon. What is even far more glaring is the Inspector General found that the Assistant Director of Training, appointed by Director Clancy to manage and direct all aspects of personnel career development and operational capacity training for the agency, suggested that the information contained in this database be leaked to embarrass the congressman. Mr. Chairman, while this incident is reprehensible, it is not beneficial for us to be here today to speak about it in isolation. We must have a broader, productive discussion about the Secret Service's management and culture. And finally, I know the Secret Service cannot improve without help from Congress. Therefore, I need to know from the director what he needs from us to not only make the adequate changes for staffing, but also the technological advances for personal databases. But I also need to know from the director what his plans for the agency are when he has top-level management that turns a blind eye instead of addressing issues. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the ranking minority member of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Subcommittee on Regulatory Affairs and Federal Management, the gentlelady from North Dakota, Ms. Heitkamp, for any statement she may have.
Thank you, Chairman Perry and Chairman Langford, and welcome Mr. Clancy, Mr. Roth, and Mr. Williamson. I first want to say thank you to the brave men and the brave women who serve in the Secret Service. While I understand the last few months and few years have been marked by a high-profile incidents of agency misconduct, I know, and you know, the majority of our agents work hard and put their life on the line every day to protect the White House, past presidents, presidential candidates, and many administrative officials and foreign dignitaries. I also know firsthand, as a former leader of a law enforcement agency, what the bad actions of a 2 or 3 or 4 agents can do to the morale of an entire organization. And I know that just looking at the faces behind you, Mr. Clancy, I know the effect that these high-profile discussions have had. I'm here in a spirit of let's work together to make the Secret Service what the Secret Service should be, the most trusted law enforcement agency in America. Let's restore the morale of your agents. Let's work together in a management collaboration and cooperation to change this dynamic and once again have your agents stand tall if they tell their friends and their neighbors that they work for the Secret Service. that is a big part of why I'm here today, is to remember and to remind, I think, everyone on this dais that there are literally thousands of men and women who every day walk alongside cars, willing to sacrifice their life in protection of leaders of this country. And nothing that can be done by one person can take away the bravery of those men and women. And so clearly we have some issues to discuss. There's no doubt about it. And clearly you've already heard the concerns that we have here today. But my reason for being here and for being interested in this topic is really to restore the morale and restore the integrity of the Secret Service so that all the brave men and women who have done nothing wrong in the Secret Service can once again hold their heads high. And so with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair, thanks to Gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the ranking minority member of the House Committee on Homeland Security, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for his statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank the Oversight and Management Efficiency Subcommittee and the Senate Subcommittee on Regulatory Affairs and Federal Management for holding today's hearing. I also welcome Director Clancy, Inspector General Roth, and Director Williamson today. I join my colleagues who've already said before me in thanking the men and women of the Secret Service for their work during both the papal visit and the 70th anniversary of the United Nations. The dedication of the agents and officers of the Secret Service is admirable. Unfortunately, their tireless work is time and again overshadowed by the exposure of symptomatic problems within the agency. The issues that lie within the Secret Service existed long before Director Clancy's appointment. However, as head of the agency, Congress, the public, and the officers and agents he leads hold him accountable. Prior to Director Clancy's appointment, serious operational lapses and leadership failures led to Secretary Johnson's appointment of an independent panel to review the Secret Service. This panel, known as a Protective Mission Panel, had several glaring findings and recommendations. One of these findings is what I've realized and articulated through many years of oversight of the Secret Service. The law enforcement agency needs to undergo a cultural change that includes leadership that is capable of fostering greater accountability. The panel stated the agency is starved for leadership. Unfortunately, it still seems that as if the Secret Service has yet to be fed. Since the Protective Mission Panel completed its review, the Office of Inspector General has led investigations into misconduct involving Secret Service supervisors on more than one occasion. The Inspector General found that in March, at least 4 supervisors turned a blind eye when 2 veteran agents, including the head of the President's Protective Detail, disrupted a bomb investigation by allegedly driving impaired through a barricade at the White House. Last month, the Inspector General found that at least 45 agents improperly accessed a 1980s mainframe personnel database to retrieve information in an attempt to embarrass a member of Congress. Of those agents who may have broken the law by improperly accessing this database, approximately 18 of them were at the GS-15 and SES levels. The findings also concluded the Director of the Secret Service, his Deputy Director, and his Chief of Staff failed to take seriously that agents were discussing information about the Congressman's personnel file. The Inspector General also made the finding that the Assistant Director of Training, the person appointed by Director Clancy to manage and direct all aspects of personnel, career development, and professionalism, suggested that the information found in the database be leaked in retaliation to congressional oversight. The IG's findings further illustrate that there's a lack of leadership and accountability from the top down. In this instance, very little leadership and accountability was shown. Director Clancy has indicated that the Secret Service will be expanding and undergoing a rigorous and necessary hiring phase. The new hires will be looking to their leaders for guidance. As the Secret Service expands, it's our responsibility as members of Congress to assist the Secret Service with adequate necessary funding for its mission. Both the Protective Mission Panel and the Inspector General have indicated that officer fatigue can place protectees at risk. The agency also needs to have the capacity to properly vet employees before they begin work, rather than continuing the practice of having uncleared personnel working in sensitive areas such as the White House. The new recruits should represent America and have opportunities for advancement. As of right now, the Secret Service's direct diversity numbers are dismal. Furthermore, it would be hard for the law enforcement agency's commitment to equal opportunity and inclusion to be taken seriously with a class action racial discrimination lawsuit still hanging over the Secret Service's head and the Secret Service using every delay tactic it can instead of resolving the lawsuit amicably. There must be some sweeping changes made at the Secret Service. I know the deeply rooted problems will not cease overnight, but we must get to the source of them instead of continuously glossing over, putting on Band-Aids, and going forward with business as usual. I look forward to working with the Secret Service to advance its mission. With that, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Chairman reminds other members of the subcommittee that that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this important topic. The witnesses' entire written statements will appear in the record. The chair will introduce all of the witnesses first and then recognize each of you for your testimony. Mr. Joseph Clancy was appointed Director of the United States Secret Service in February of 2015 after serving as Acting Director since October of 2014. Previously, Mr. Clancy served as the Special Agent in charge of the Presidential Protective Division. Mr. Clancy began his career with the Secret Service in 1984 in the Philadelphia Field Office. Welcome. The Honorable John Roth assumed the post of Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security in March of 2014. Previously, Mr. Roth served as the Director of the Office of Criminal Investigations at the Food and Drug Administration and as an Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. Welcome, Mr. Roth. And Mr. Joel Williamson is Managing Director of the Information Technology Issues at the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, where he leads the GAO's evaluations of information technology across the federal government. Since joining GAO in 1979, he has led numerous reviews of information technology systems and management at a variety of federal agencies. Welcome, Joel. Thank you for being here today. The chair now recognizes Mr. Clancy for his opening statement.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Langford, Chairman Perry, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, and Ranking Member Thompson, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I plan to address the findings from the recent OIG report and the many improvements implemented over the past year designed to address the Protective Mission Panel findings. I also look forward to discussing the numerous organizational changes we have made at the United States Secret Service and would like to express my gratitude and recognize the support of Secretary Johnson and the Congress in making many of these changes possible. I sit before you today a proud representative of the thousands of men and women who selflessly execute the mission of this agency on a daily basis. Recent accomplishments, including 4 near-simultaneous national special security events surrounding the papal visit and the United Nations General Assembly, as well as a number of high-profile cyber investigations, serve to reinforce this feeling. In fact, in addition to initiating protection of 2 presidential candidates last week, Secret Service personnel are at this very moment deployed around the world ensuring the President's safety while in Southeast Asia, in yet another example of their commitment and dedication to the mission. Despite the Secret Service's many recent successes, I recognize that the primary reason we are here today is to address the misconduct detailed in the OIG's report. This investigation arose from allegations that the Secret Service employees inappropriately utilized an internal database to access the applicant record of an individual who is now a member of Congress. The misconduct outlined in the report is inexcusable and unacceptable. This conduct is not supportive of the agency's unique position of public trust. On behalf of the men and women of the Secret Service, I would like to publicly renew my apology for this breach of trust and affirm my commitment to restoring it. The OIG reported that these employees violated existing Secret Service and DHS policies pertaining to the handling of the Privacy Act protected information. At the time that these violations occurred, relevant policies and procedures were in place and could be found in a number of locations, including the Secret Service Ethics Guide, the Table of Penalties, policy manuals, and required online training courses. I was angered by the willful disregard of these policies, and I am determined to ensure that all employees are held to the highest standards of professional conduct. As I've stated on prior occasions, I am committed to ensuring the accountability in this matter regardless of rank or seniority. Secretary Johnson and I stand together on this point. To date, several dozen employees have been issued disciplinary proposals relating to these events. More are on the way. The discipline is being administered in accordance with DHS and Secret Service policy, and I am confident that these actions will be fair, appropriate, and completed in a timely fashion. A contributing factor that allowed multiple individuals to improperly access this information was the nature of the information system that housed the data. Secret Service recognized this deficiency some years ago and began a process to modernize its IT infrastructure to allow for such data to be compartmentalized and restrict the access to those with an official need to know. This process was completed this past June. At this time, the MCI system has been officially retired. With respect to applicant records, the number of employees with access to the new system has been reduced by more than 95%. Finally, much has been made of my statements and the decision of the OIG to reopen the investigation on October 5th, 2015. Prior to publicly releasing the report on September 30th, the OIG provided a draft copy for my review, which reflected my statement that I became aware of the rumor on April 1st. As my colleagues and I reviewed the draft, I was reminded that I had, in fact, been made aware of the rumor on March 25th. However, let me be clear that what I was made aware of was a rumor, with no indication of employees' misconduct or employees accessing internal databases. In order to ensure the accuracy of the report and knowing the concern it would cause, I took the initiative to contact Mr. Roth prior to the report's publication to ensure the report was accurate and correct on this point. With respect to the recommendations of the Protective Mission Panel, tremendous progress has been made in all areas. I am proud to say that we have significantly altered the way the Secret Service is structured and managed. We have also made strides in hiring new members of our workforce and expanding training opportunities for current members. I'm also realistic in knowing that many of the changes we are making will take time and that we must continue to communicate these changes to our workforce. In the interest of time, I will point you to my written testimony submitted in advance of this hearing for a more thorough description of this process and look forward to discussing our progress on these recommendations with each of you today. I would like to close by remembering a remarkable leader and true friend, former Assistant Director Jerry Parr. Jerry is widely known for the decisive actions he took during the March 30th, 1981 assassination attempt on President Ronald Reagan. The decisions he made that day, including evacuating the president directly to the hospital, likely saved the life of the president. As I reflected on his passing, I had the opportunity to review a speech he made to a graduating special agent training class in 1994. He stated, and I quote, "An organizational culture is a product of time, successes, sufferings, failures, and just plain hard work. After 100 years or so, deep roots are developed and a corporate memory evolves. While another agency can purchase persons, equipment, and technology similar to the Secret Service, it cannot buy this corporate memory. This is a priceless commodity," end quote. As the men and women of this agency traverse these challenging times, It is important to remember that culture involves more than an agency's failures, and that the successes derived from hard work and dedication will prevail as the lasting corporate memory of the Secret Service. Thank you, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Clancy. The chair now recognizes Mr. Roth for an opening statement.
Chairman Langford, Perry, and Johnson, ranking members Heitkamp, Watson, Coleman, and Thompson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today to testify. We've conducted a number of investigations, audits, and inspections of Secret Service programs and operations, and we have a number of ongoing projects. My written testimony describes some of that work and discusses its implications. For my oral remarks, I will discuss our investigation into the allegations that the Secret Service agents improperly accessed a restricted database to discover details about Chairman Jason Chaffetz's application to the Secret Service, as well as some other ongoing work. We found that the Chaffetz application entry contained within a Secret Service database called the Master Central Index was accessed by Secret Service employees on approximately 60 occasions between March 25th and April 2nd of this year. We concluded that the vast majority of those who accessed the information did so in violation of the Privacy Act of 1974, as well as Secret Service and DHS policy. We identified one individual who acknowledged disclosing information protected by the Privacy Act to an outside source. However, because the number of individuals with access to this information was so great, we were unable to identify others who may have disclosed protected information to third parties. We found that the access began minutes after Director Clancy began testifying before the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform on March 24th and continued in the days following. Knowledge of Chairman Chaffetz's application was widespread and fueled and confirmed by improper access to the Secret Service database at issue. We found that a number of senior managers knew agents were accessing the MCI improperly, and some of them accessed it themselves. Other senior managers were aware that Chairman Chaffetz once had applied to the Secret Service, but they apparently did not comprehend the seriousness of what was developing. As a result, no one acted until it was too late to stop this unauthorized and unlawful activity. Our investigation also revealed that the MCI, a case management tool implemented in 1984, did not have the audit and access controls of a modern IT system or appropriately segregate the information. Such controls and segregation may have prevented or at least minimized the behavior we discovered. This also appears to run counter to the Privacy Act, which requires agencies to establish appropriate administrative, technical, and physical safeguards to ensure the security and confidentiality of the records. Additionally, the Secret Service must ensure that only relevant records are maintained in these types of databases. The Privacy Act requires that the agency maintain its records only such information about an individual as is relevant and necessary to accomplish a purpose of the agency. The fact that the MCI had records of an unsuccessful application from 12 years earlier, which contained sensitive information, the disclosure of which could lead to identity theft, may violate this provision of the Privacy Act. Finally, although all agents were trained in the use of the system and received yearly refresher training, it was apparent that many of the agents disregarded that training. The Secret Service recently reported that it retired the MCI and migrated all data to about 5 other Secret Service information systems in September 2015. Our Office of Information Technology Audits is currently conducting a technical security assessment of the information systems that the Secret Service now uses to store and retrieve this information. We expect to complete that assessment and issue a final report in February of 2016. Over the past year and a half, as part of our independent oversight effort, we have investigated various incidents involving allegations of misconduct by Secret Service employees and other issues related to the Secret Service's organization and mission. The results of our investigation and reviews point to ongoing organizational and management challenges. The Secret Service has certainly taken steps to address these challenges, but not always successfully. Additionally, we are reviewing 3 incidents involving potential security lapses. For each incident, shots being fired at the White House from Constitution Avenue, an intruder jumping over the fence and entering the White House, and an armed guard coming in close proximity to the President, we are determining whether the Secret Service followed its own protective policies, what actions were taken to correct identified deficiencies, and whether these corrections were adequate. The ultimate aim of our review is to determine and understand the root causes of these lapses. This fiscal year, we plan to issue 3 reports on these incidents, as well as a capping report that identifies the root causes and includes any other necessary overarching recommendations. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement. I welcome any questions you or any other members of the subcommittees may have.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. The chair now recognizes Mr. Williamson for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Perry, Chairman Langford, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, Ranking Member Heitkamp, Chairman Johnson of the full committee, Ranking Member Thompson of the full committee, members of the subcommittees. Thank you for inviting GAO to testify today. As requested, I'll briefly summarize our statement on information security across the federal government. GAO has had long-standing concerns about the state of information security in the federal government. We initially identified federal information security as a government-wide high-risk area 18 years ago. We subsequently expanded this high-risk designation to include computerized systems supporting the nation's critical infrastructure and the protection of privacy and personally identifiable information. The cyber threats facing our country continue to be very serious. The impact of these threats is highlighted by recent incidents involving breaches of sensitive, personally identifiable information, and the sharp increase in information security incidents reported by federal agencies over the last several years, which have risen from about 5,500 in 2006 to about 67,000 in 2014. Given the risks posed by external and internal threats and the increasing number of incidents, it's crucial that federal agencies take appropriate steps to secure their systems and data. However, we and inspectors general have continued to identify significant weaknesses in needed security controls. For example, for fiscal year 2014, 19 of 24 major federal agencies declared information security as a material weakness or significant deficiency. Most of these agencies have reported weaknesses in the key control areas that we track, including controls intended to prevent, limit, or detect unauthorized or inappropriate access to networks and data. In particular, our work has often shown that too many agency employees have too much unnecessary access to too many systems and databases. Agencies need to implement clear policies on access to sensitive information and grant access permissions to users at the minimum level necessary to perform legitimate job-related tasks on a need-to-know basis. Deploying effective monitoring and accountability mechanisms to track user activities on networks and systems is also essential to ensuring that improper access and usage are quickly detected and remedied. To address the many information security weaknesses at federal agencies, GAO and inspectors general have made thousands of recommendations. Over the last 6 years, GAO has made about 2,000 recommendations to improve information security programs and controls. To date, about 58% of these recommendations have been implemented. Until agencies take actions to address weaknesses and implement GAO and IG recommendations, federal networks and sensitive information, including personally identifiable information, will be at increased risk from internal and external threats. Actions to implement recommendations will strengthen systems and data security and reduce the risk of cyber intrusions or attacks. That concludes a summary of my statement, and I look forward to addressing your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. Chair now recognizes himself for some questions. Begin with Mr. Roth. Mr. Roth, how many subpoenas regarding the Chaffetz incident and the MCI, the Master Central Index, how many subpoenas were issued?
I believe it was only one subpoena.
So why, if there were multiple individuals that admittedly breached the information and may have compromised it, why would only one subpoena be issued? Why wouldn't there be multiple subpoenas issued for multiple individuals?
Well, most of the information that we received were from government data systems, so no subpoena would be necessary. The only time we have to subpoena information is if we were going to a third party, like a telephone record provider, for example. And typically it is our policy in these kinds of circumstances to have a level of predication before we go and subpoena somebody's personal telephone records. We had predication only on one individual rather than the hundreds who may have had access to that information.
Even those who admitted to wrongdoing?
That's correct.
Was the index searched for other improper access incidences?
It was not. The index itself was created in 1984. It did not have the ability to readily do the kinds of forensics that you would do on a modern data system. And in fact, what we were required to do, that is, what the administrators of the database were required to do, was actually write scripts or programs to be able to find access to this information. It was a highly time-consuming kind of a thing, and because of the necessity for finding answers as quickly as we could, we only restricted it to Chairman Chaffetz's name.
So then, based on that, would it be correct to say that we have absolutely no idea at this point regarding that data system, the Master Central Index, if any other Americans or any other citizens have had similar things occur regarding their personally identifiable information, whether it was searched, whether it was divulged? We have no idea?
That's correct.
Well, that's a bit unsettling. Director Clancy, are you familiar with Operation Moonlight?
Sir, I'm familiar with some of the details of that, yes.
Can you just inform us? I understand you've got thousands of employees. This hearing is not meant to impugn or besmirch the credibility of your agency. I think Americans have traditionally and currently have the highest regard and want to have that. But how does something like that happen?
Yes, sir.
You know, so Secret Service agents used government information, accessed databases, and then used equipment, time, material to surveil, essentially, a private citizen's property without any due cause of anything. Is that essentially? I mean, that's my narrative, but what's yours? And then how does that happen?
Sir, forgive me, as I was not here during that time frame, so I'm going to rely on some briefings when I first came in as the acting director, and it was found, as the OIG's report illustrates, people made very poor decisions. There was misjudgment, should not have happened, and there were some changes made in our management.
Well, I'll tell you, I looked at, and I imagine you're familiar with it. I'm just going to read you. The subject is Directive 2015-09, Disciplinary and Adverse Actions, right?
Yes, sir.
It's from your agency, and I guess it's moving forward based on what has occurred regarding the information in the data breach. And I just want to just give you a flavor of what I see here. An employee is entitled to, the employee is entitled to, the employee is entitled to. And I'm just kind of going through each paragraph. The employee will be provided with. The employee shall have an opportunity to. The employee is entitled to. You kind of get my gist. And the reason I say that is what I'm wondering is, and I think what a lot of America is wondering, what are the consequences of the actions of 45 or 41 employees who accessed Mr. Chaffetz's data and then whoever disseminated it up to 60 times. What are the consequences to those individuals? We see what the employees' rights are.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, sir.
But what are the consequences? How does Mr. Chaffetz get his reputation back? What's going to happen to these individuals? What's currently happening? Where do things stand?
Mr. Chairman, what Secretary Johnson and I met and talked about this in a true sense of transparency, because myself and my executive staff have been all interviewed in this case. We made a joint decision that the Department of Homeland Security would make the proposals, and in this case, I will tell you, and I've heard the comments that were made today, reprehensible, disturbing, embarrassing. I agree with everything that's been said here today, and my workforce does as well. And in fact, this hearing today will help me get this word out, the importance of protecting PII. We have all of this, the training, and we have the ethics guides, and we go out and train our new recruits. But a hearing like this puts a definitive stamp on our failures. And in this case, the individuals, to answer your question, Mr. Chairman, in this case, we are proposing, as of today, approximately 42, don't hold me to that number, approximately 42 will be issued a proposal of discipline ranging from anywhere from 3 days to 12 days of suspension.
So that's the maximum. The maximum is 12 days of, and I'm going to, the chair's going to indulge himself on the time here a little bit. I'm following a line of questioning. So the maximum penalty, the maximum repercussion for doing, we all know that when you look at these computer systems, there's a warning in front that this is to be used for official business only, and we all know. Look, I hold, as your folks do, a secret security clearance, top secret security clearance. Everybody in the room knows, everybody in your agency knows that using this information for what it was used for was incorrect, improper, unauthorized, illegal. And the most we can hope for, the most toughest disciplinary action right now is not a loss of revocation of your secret security clearance, not the loss of your employment. It's 12 days suspension. I just want to be clear. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is for the grades 15 and below. Those proposals have been issued as of today, I'm pretty sure on that. The SES level folks have not had their discipline proposed as of this date.
Is Mr. Lowry an SES level employee?
He is, yes.
What is the range of options of discipline or consequence for Mr. Lowry? If you can inform if there's a, I'm not asking you to tell us which one it is because maybe you're still completing your investigation, but what can we expect?
The range goes from a letter of reprimand all the way up to removal.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma.
I'd like to defer my questioning times to the ranking member. She has to be on the floor, actually, of the Senate in a little bit, actually working through a bill, so I'd like to defer my time.
It's ordered.
Thank you, Chairman Langford. Every one of, Mr. Clancy, Director Clancy, every incident that we know of, there seems like there wasn't an adult in the room. Yes. That there was no one who provided that voice of saying, hey guys, this is not the way to do this. Hey, we have a responsibility that's higher. And so while we look at management and we look at resources, you said in your testimony, you talked about how the corporate culture of the Secret Service is a priceless commodity. Yes. Every day that priceless commodity gets threatened by agents not willing to be the adult in the room, not willing to be the person who stands up and says, knock it off. Because you can't do it just from a management standpoint. You've got to change the culture at the bottom. And I think that's one of the concerns we have, is that it seems like all of this has happened with a great impunity. And almost, you can't touch me, as the chairman just talked about, or it's okay to do this. And so I want to know, as we look at management changes, as we look at systemic rules and policies, those rules and policies are only as good as the commitment that people at every level within the Secret Service have for change. So what are you doing within the Secret Service to build capacity for people to be the adult in the room, to stop this at the source and say, this is not what we do in the Secret Service?
Thank you, Senator. This discipline system that we have in place now is relatively new. It's approximately 2 years old, and then which includes a table of penalties. In the past, discipline was handled at a more local level. Now, everything is funneled up to our Office of Integrity.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm not talking about discipline. I'm talking about culture, and obviously consequences are part of changing that culture. But what about the integrity at every level of basically saying, we don't do this. We don't go to hotels and hire, people to service us. We don't drive into the White House and disrupt a major investigation. We don't access a congressman's secret records. Yes. We don't do that. And who is the person, and how are we training people at every level to stand up and stop this behavior? Because I don't think we can do it just having hearings like this. I think we've got to restore this priceless commodity that you're talking about, which is the integrity element of the men and women at every level, knowing that it's their responsibility to help maintain the integrity of the Secret Service.
I agree with you, Senator. We have to do more in terms of communicating with our people. We can have all the training exercises and all the online training, but for example, I've been to approximately 10 of our field offices, all of our protective details. I speak personally to our agents. I walk around the White House, talk to the officers. I meet all the recruits prior to their graduation, both agent and UD. I tell them what they represent, what's expected of them. But I've got to do more of that, as well as our staff. We have to just keep communicating to our people. And again, what the Congress is doing today is a help to us and to our agency, because again, the seriousness of what we've done in this particular case resonates by these types of hearings.
Occurred, Mr. Director. I want to talk about the panel's recommendation. One of the things I think was noted in the panel was that we needed new leadership. We needed leadership from outside of this organization that didn't have the long-term relationships and might be somehow influenced by the relationships it did have, and seeing it in a sort of insular way. You have a 27-year record or experience with the agency. Clearly, you are an insider. There was a removal of a number of deputies, and they were replaced. And the majority of the deputies that were replaced were also from within the agency with long service records. My question is, how do we change the culture of the organization if the very top leadership has been a part of that culture and perhaps only sees this organization from within? Would we have not been better served had you identified the capacity to go to the outside and find people with certain skills, leadership abilities, and just accountabilities that would have transcended the relationships that individuals may have had? Could that possibly have helped us to become more efficient, more effective, and more accountable as an agency?
Yes. Thank you for that question. I will tell you that I respect the view of many that thought that this position, the director's position, should have been someone from the outside. There's good reason for that. I understand that. I consider the fact that I had left the service for 3 years, worked in private industry, has allowed me to bring in some outside views on how to run a business and how to run this agency. So what I did do is, first of all, I brought in a chief operating officer, a civilian from outside the agency. And that COO, chief operating officer, is equivalent to the deputy director. Additionally, we've created a lot of subject matter expert positions where traditionally they answer to agents. You know, prior to me arriving here, all the top-level security was run by agents. And some of them, candidly, were not subject matter experts. For example, finance. We now have a chief financial officer who does not answer directly to an assistant director who's an agent. She is the chief financial officer. Chief technology officer is an engineer, not an agent. The chief strategy officer is a lawyer who's not an agent. There's a few others as well. So we're trying to bring in this outside perspective to run this business, but also move the agents into our core mission of protection and investigations.
So talk to me a little bit about your ability to bring in not only new people into the agency, but more diverse people. Because the information that I've read regarding the Secret Service is that it is predominantly white male. There's a small percentage of women, and not consistent with across the board in federal government. What are you doing to address the issue of lack of diversity in terms of race and ethnicity and gender in positions? And what are you doing to address that longstanding and outstanding issue with the civil rights complaints? to
Yes.
move beyond them, as opposed to using this system to delay the implementation of the corrective actions that could be taking place. Thank you.
In terms of diversity, I think I would ask you first to look at my executive staff. On that staff of approximately 12 people, we have 5 African Americans, 6 females, but going down throughout the ranks, you're correct. We are not where we want to be with diversity. So we are targeting universities that are provide diversity for us. We've shortened our hiring process where we can go to these universities and over a weekend period of time do a testing, an interview, and a polygraph if the first 2 steps are met. But we are targeting specific areas of the country to really work on this diversity, and because we are deficient in that area. Certainly with females as well. We are working diligently to try to improve that diversity.
Thank you. I yield back for another.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes Mr. Johnson from Wisconsin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Inspector General Roth, in your written testimony, quote, you state that information was accessed by Secret Service employees on approximately 60 occasions between March 25th and April 2nd of this year. And you went on to say, we concluded that a vast majority of those who access this information did so in violation of the Privacy Act of 1974. What are the penalties for violating the Privacy Act of 1974?
There's civil penalties for the agency that's involved if there is a widespread sort of gross negligence standard. So there are civil penalties, that is monetary penalties for the agency involved. For individuals who accessed the system and just improperly, knowing that it was protected under the Privacy Act, that's a misdemeanor, which has a fine as a penalty, but no custodial sentence.
Is there any Department of Justice investigation being undertaken right now to determine whether those misdemeanors were in fact are they going to be prosecuted?
No. During the course of our investigation, we presented a case, the most compelling case we had, and it was declined by the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Why would that be?
There's several reasons. First of all, each individual agent has a Fifth Amendment right to not speak to us if, in fact, he's under criminal jeopardy. So we could not interview individuals, compel their interview, which we ultimately had to do in this case for a lack of voluntary cooperation. So the level of evidence that the Department of Justice had was not sufficient for them to move forward. Additionally, when one looks at the penalty, it was simply a matter of competing resources.
Director Clancy, you know, I got involved in looking into the cultural problems with the Secret Service back in early 2012 after the events of Cartagena. This is not why I ran for United States Senate, was to look into the Secret Service. It's an agency that we all want to have a high deal of credibility. And, you know, as you stated in your testimony, the culture in many respects is almost, you know, beyond reproachment. I mean, it's a fabulous agency. They're doing great work. But on the other hand, there's a real cultural problem. What are you going to do about it? I mean, I hear communication. I understand communication, but actions speak far louder than words. And when we're just talking about a disciplinary process, when there are violations of the Privacy Act and there are no prosecutions of it, nobody's held to even the misdemeanor penalties, there's nothing more corrosive in an organization that has a cultural problem when misdeeds go unpunished. So what actions are going to be taken? This is 3 years now. You know, Cartagena occurred in April of 2012. We had 2013 and 2014 and 2015. 3 years later, we have a number of members of the Secret Service violating the Privacy Act, violating DHS and Secret Service procedures. It doesn't seem like we're getting a handle on the cultural problem within the Secret Service.
Yes. Senator, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. We have removed people from the Secret Service. You mentioned Cartagena. Several were removed in that case. As of today, we are in the process of proposing a removal for an individual unrelated to this. People are removed in the Secret Service. This table of penalties that we use, and I know we've referred to it a few times here, but we have benchmarked that with other agencies. So we want to be consistent with what's being done across the board. And just recently, I published for the first time to our entire workforce our integrity, the discipline over the past year, so they can see what types of cases are out there. Are supervisors being disciplined equal to the workforce? We're trying to be transparent. Again, that communication is critical here, but we're trying to be more transparent and driving home the point that people will be held accountable. And in this case, they will be held accountable.
As the chairman was pointing out, there are an awful lot of protections for the employees, for the actual agents. But again, it's hard to see the accountability. Do you find that to be a problem? Are you constrained in what actions you would like to take based on all the protections for the agents? I mean, should we be looking at the law there and making sure the agencies have enough power to actually hold people accountable?
Well, I think the accepted service would give us, would allow us to speed up that, the proposals and the discipline process. I know sometimes we are delayed in the process as we move forward.
So you would like some ability to take stronger action quicker?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Good. I think we need to take that into account. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Almost to the member before me, the conversation has been about the culture of the organization. And I think it speaks to whether or not internally we can fix it, or do we just cover it up? And I'll get to the specifics shortly. Inspector Roth, in your review of the Secret Service, how would you describe the culture within the service, especially at the executive level?
As we noted in the report on the access to Chairman Chaffetz's employment record, we found a number of supervisors who in fact themselves had access to MCI. To me, that was a very troubling incident. Additionally, few people then elevated their concerns or the fact that this was being used to a high enough level of management for something to be done. So that was sort of certainly troubling behavior that we identified.
So So we had senior level people accessing information. Then we had that information being noted by people above those individuals. And is your testimony that nothing happened?
That's correct. I'll give two examples, if I may. The first was the special agent in charge of the Washington field office came to understand that some of her employees were accessing the MCI to sort of understand whether or not that rumor existed. She ordered her individuals or her subordinates to cut it out. I think her exact words were "knock it off" or "quit fooling around with the MCI database." And in fact, that's what occurred in the Washington field office. Unfortunately, throughout the country, other individuals were doing that. So that would be one example. The second example is the special agent in charge of the Indianapolis field division, who was frankly curious why it was that, in his view, Chairman Chaffetz was so hard on Director Clancy. And he, just out of idle curiosity, accessed the database himself to discover, in fact, that Chairman Chaffetz was a prior applicant. He did nothing with that information, did not elevate it up or do any other kind of conduct. There are a number of examples like that.
So, thank you very much. So, Director Clancy, I hope you sense the membership's concern about the culture. And I would hope that going forward, you would take this hearing, as you said, as a moment of instruction to try to fix it. The men and women deserve it. They do a wonderful job, and but it's about leadership, and I think it's absolutely important. As you know, I've been talking to you since this summer. A little small issue to some. It's relative to the fact that we found out that there were 643 employees assigned to duty that required a security clearance, and they were working for the department without the completion of the clearances. And I had asked you for the demographics of those individuals. And as of this date, I don't have the information. Know you've been busy, but can you give me some indication when I can expect to receive the demographics of those 643 employees?
Yes, sir. First of all, my apologies that you have not received that information. The 640 individuals, I'm assuming, may be department-wide. I think within the Secret Service, we did have people working that did not have their security clearances. I think it was much less than that, but we will get you an answer in the coming days on that.
Okay,
issue.
well, it was department-wide over a 5-year period. But my point is, some of us run up on men and women around the country who indicate that I'm trying to get employed with the Secret Service, but they tell me I can't get considered for employment because I haven't been cleared. I can't go to training. I can't do a lot of things. But it troubles some of us when we're already employing people whose job require clearance on the other hand. So I don't know if that's favoritism or what, but it's real concerning.
I'll follow up on that, sir. I can tell you that we don't look at that diversity in terms of who gets a security clearance, who does not. In this case, the one that you referenced, and I'll speak for the Secret Service, we were delinquent as we went through this hiring process. We did not get people their security clearances in a timely manner. And they were assigned to positions outside of Washington for the most part. But what we have done now is we've brought in some contractors, additional 14 contractors, to ensure this never happens again, where someone goes through our training, and when they get their graduation, when they graduate, they should have their clearance. So that has been resolved now within the Secret Service.
So thank you, Mr. So is your testimony that there's nobody working for the Secret Service right now without a security clearance?
That's correct. To the best of my knowledge, that is correct.
Can you verify that for the committee?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yield back, Mr. Chair.
Chairman, thanks to gentlemen. The chairman now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Loudermilk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. This is especially troubling for me as we look back over the history of this incredible agency, the service. It's an icon of what I think is American exceptionalism, and the actions that we've seen take place. Of course, it tarnishes the reputation of the service, but more so, I think it really tarnishes the image the American people have of what they have always elevated as the exceptional service, not just in the nation but in the world. And I think it's imperative that we address these issues not just in hindsight but going forward to make sure that we restore the trust of the American people, the trust of Congress, and the trust of the protectees. Mr. Roth, you said something in your written statement that really struck me here. The Secret Service has certainly taken steps to address these challenges, but not always successfully. These persistent challenges may not be easy to resolve through expeditious action, such as suspending employees and issuing new guidance. They may require more fundamental change that addresses the root of the misconduct. I think that's where we need to focus. What is the root? In your opinion, what's the root of the problem?
When you look at guidance with regard to creating an ethical culture, they say it comes in three sort of dimensions. One is tone at the top, which is not just at the very top, but all through the leadership of an organization. The leaders have to set the exact right tone. The second is to have a code of conduct and a code of ethics that is truly meaningful. And the third is to enforce that code of conduct in a way that expresses to the rank and file that you mean what you say with regard to that tone at the top. So you have to look at all three of those things. As Director Clancy said, I think the middle part, the code of conduct, was not there until Cartagena, and there have been steps that they have taken since Cartagena to establish a more rigorous policy. So that's certainly an improvement that we think is well deserved, or a positive step in the right direction. But again, it has to be toned all the way through the organization, as well as a meaningful enforcement of that code of conduct.
I have a timeline of misconduct that went back just prior to Cartagena, but it goes back to 2011. Up until that time, I don't recall of there's misconduct in any organization, but was there a history like we're seeing now, Mr. Roth, that you were aware of prior to the last 4 or 5 years?
I'm not aware of it. I just don't have any insight into it. Certainly, we're only as good as the audits we do and the investigations we do, and we didn't have anything before that.
All right, thank you. Mr. Clancy, and I applaud your efforts. You've got a difficult task. You've been in the agency for quite a while. Do you recall that there was the level or the consistency of misconduct previously in the agency, or is this just something new?
I think any agency has always had some misconduct, and the Secret Service has had misconduct in the past. I think it has, more attention has been brought to this misconduct in the last several years, and that's a good thing. And I applaud the Inspector General's office for that. This has to be brought out in the open, these misconduct episodes. Otherwise, we won't correct it. So.
You also, make sure I understood it right, you said that you're trying to benchmark your disciplinary actions of other agencies. Is that what you were referring to, looking at other agencies?
Yes, my understanding when the table of penalties was built out, our legal team worked with other agencies to see what they were doing from a discipline standpoint, what their table of penalties were, and we took their best ideas, best practices, and built ours.
I would suggest you guys have to be a little stronger, a little better. Just the nature of the work that you do is so important to this nation. One last thing, I think we've talked a lot about culture in here, and that is true. I think what you're getting at is the culture of the agency. It's the esprit de corps. You're in the Secret Service. You have an obligation to the integrity, the honor, and the dignity to uphold this agency. And I think that may be what's missing is somewhere. Just real quickly, I was going over this timeline, and there seems to be a common element with a lot of these. And I look at Cartagena, alcohol was involved. June 2013, alcohol. November 2013, abuse of alcohol. December 2013, alcohol. March, alcohol. June 2014, alcohol. There seems to be this continual cycle of alcohol abuse associated with this, which, from my experience in the military, usually indicates that there's a morale issue. And I'll let you comment, and I'll yield back after that.
Yes, and you're correct, Congressman. We do have a morale issue, and a lot of it is because of our staffing. And that's one of the things we need to do, work with our staffing, so that if we can build up this staffing level, we can get more training, which our people want, give them a better quality of life, which will help their morale as well. But again, to your point here today, the accountability in discipline matters also helps that morale. Are we going to hold people accountable? And I will tell you, the episodes since I've been here, you mentioned the March 4th incident where an individual, two individuals after a retirement party drove onto the White House. I can tell you that retirement parties now are, I don't know of any that are taking place. People got that message. What we're talking about today, PII, people are getting this message. So unfortunately, it takes these significant errors, misconduct, to resonate sometimes with our people. But I do want to also say one thing. The less than 1% of our people are involved in this misconduct. It truly, 99%, as some of you have mentioned today, are doing the right thing. But that's, and they're working very hard. But we have to focus on that less than 1% because we are held at a very high, and rightfully so, we're at a high level.
And I hope you can get the service back to the point to where people aren't doing the right thing because they're afraid of the discipline, but they're doing the right thing because they're dedicated to their job, to the service, to the spirit of the service, and their oath to the Constitution. And thank you, sir. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Clancy, just to have some statistics here on the record. According to the Partnership for Public Service, the agency is 74% male. Is that correct?
75%, let me just check that real quick. That sounds correct, but let me just.
72% white, leaving it severely out of step with other agencies. Women make up 25% of the agency's workforce, but only about 11% of the agents and uniform officers.
And you're correct, yes.
You talked about your outreach efforts with universities and targeting certain areas of the nation. Have you engaged an employment agency to help you or to advise you in finding a more diverse workforce?
I'm not aware that we have taken that step yet. It's an excellent suggestion that we may look into. I will tell you that when we go to these different areas of the country, we have a very diverse recruiting group that goes out to try to encourage females to apply, as well as across the board in diversity. So, yes.
Are you targeting also the military or
Yes.
law enforcement agencies looking for, there's great people working in
Absolutely.
law enforcement?
We go to the military bases, and again, we run these, what we call ELACs, these entry-level assessment centers, so that, for example, at a military base, if you want to apply for a job with the Secret Service, we can do a testing initially. If you pass the test, that very day, we can do a super interview of you, and if again, it looks like you're a good candidate, then we'll move you right to a polygraph, all within a weekend, to try to speed up that process. But absolutely, the military bases, and we found personally that people that have had a military background serve us very well.
Well, they have a high work ethic.
They do.
They understand the pecking order. They understand the need to serve. I am disturbed by the incidents. I am happy to hear that it's a reflection on less than 1% of the workforce, but by no means does it make me feel better or safer. So would you say you have an agent problem, or do you have a management problem?
It's a management problem, and it starts with me. There's no question. It's a management problem. It's a leadership problem that I've got to find an answer to.
Have you taken steps to ensure that when we are clamping down on agents, that tougher disciplinary actions are taken upon the people who supervise them?
Yes, supervisors are held accountable. And again, with this, we've put this out, again, trying to be transparent to show our workforce how.
Are there policies in place to ensure that whistleblowers are protected?
Yes, I mean, everyone in the service knows that whistleblowers perform a vital function, and they cannot be, there's no retaliation, there's no, you've got to let them go. Yeah.
So there are disciplinary steps that the agency takes when the department rules are violated.
Yes.
And there are disciplinary steps that the department takes when our laws are broken.
Yes.
The agents are read Miranda rights. Is that what you were referring to an earlier question?
No, they're not read Miranda rights. They're read either Calkines or Garrity. Let the Inspector General correct me here if I'm wrong on that, but that's what they're read, yes.
I come from the civilian part of law enforcement, so pardon. So criminal charges are filed, whether they're felony charges or misdemeanor charges. What are your steps? What steps do you take during that process?
Well, if criminal charges are filed, we typically immediately move to removing the security clearance so that this individual can no longer have access to any of the protected facilities, any access to any of our protectees, of course, or any of our
So what happens to the rest of that immediate department that are working with that employee now in the process of a criminal investigation and their supervisors?
If it's at that point, we don't have, we remove all of their badges, we remove their equipment, and then it goes through the normal course of the criminal justice system.
My time is out, but what I'm trying to figure out is if you have a rotten apple, how do you ensure that the whole bowl isn't bad?
Yes. We can remove them very quickly in that case when there's criminal charges. And Mr. Chairman, if I could just correct the record for one item, Ranking Member Thompson had asked me about the security clearances. Our agents and officers, some of them that are in training now, have not had their clearances settled. They will by graduation. So anyone who graduates from our academy will have a security clearance. But while they're going through training, some of them may not have.
But as of this summer, when we talked, that was not the case.
That's correct. That was not the case. You're absolutely correct, yes.
Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Clausen.
Sorry to hear about your dad.
Thank you, sir.
Greatest generation.
It was. And I know many here have lost their fathers from that generation, and I think we've all learned from them.
Yeah, is your dad a vet?
He was, yes.
Yeah, I know all about this. I just lost my mom, and so you know, it's the generation that the glass is half full. Put the team first, work hard, and go to church on Sunday, and the rest answers itself, right?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Well, we were lucky to have those kind of folks.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And although, you know, we do a little bit for our country now, they, without ever saying it, they remind us that compared to what they did, we don't do much.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
I have full respect and admiration for you and your dad. I've always thought of organizational culture as being the combination of performance and behavior, and therefore how your agents and your employees think of themselves is dependent on those two things, because they all see it. When bad behavior is not dealt with quickly, it impacts that culture and how we view each other, because it discourages good performers that, you know, that are doing their job every day. Everything tells me that these incidents of bad behavior ought to be isolated, put up in lights for everyone to see, and that action needs to be taken quickly. Therefore, and that really is the responsibility of leadership.
Yes.
Therefore, when it drags on and on, it really sends a bad message to this corporate culture that you referred to earlier. Why so slow? I mean, you know, systematic, schmistematic, you know, you're the chief and you got the head of Homeland Security, you know, I mean, let's go. Let's take some action so you can do what's right and preserve the culture for all your great performers. Right. Am I missing something on that? Why so slow?
No, you're correct. Again, certainly if there's any criminal activity, it's much quicker. We can remove their security clearance right away. With other types of misconduct, as we're talking about in this case, it does take time for the full investigation. And again, in transparency, we had the OIG handle this investigation to do a very thorough investigation. And then once the investigation was completed, then we could move forward with that discipline. But under Title V, the employees and federal employees are given certain rights, and we follow that process. But eventually, we get to where we need to be. Eventually, we do get to where we need to be.
Well, it's going pretty slow for my taste, and I think for the sake of your organization, I'd be pushing this as hard as I can, because typical folks that have run large organizations don't understand this kind of length of time for, you know, it just festers because you don't put it behind you.
Yes, sir.
And so, you know, my point on that is let's get going. I have found in organizational change that if you don't change a third of your people in positions of responsibility, you won't change the culture, because they're going to outweight you. They always outweight you.
Yes, sir.
And if you change more than 50%, then you may have a problem with the institutional memory that you discussed earlier. I'm really glad you brought diversity of thought and of experience into your direct reports, but they'll outweight you below that. So just, you know, no rule of thumb is 100% for sure. But if I'm sitting in your chair and not changing a third of my managers, and you're thinking you're going to change your organization, good luck.
Yes, sir.
Don't believe it. So, you know, I don't know if you've thought of it in numeric terms, but let's get a performance culture going without washing away the memory of the successes of the past. I'm all for having both, and I don't think, if you implied this in your early comments, I don't think it's one or the other. Change your culture and preserve the successes of the past. Does that make sense?
It does, yes, sir.
Okay. Is there anything about what I said that you would disagree with?
No, I wouldn't, sir. No.
Okay. Well, look, we want you to succeed. We can talk all day about whether you should be in the job or not, but you're in the job.
Yes, sir.
And we need you to be successful. So anything I can do, our group, we want you to succeed. And look, I really like the tone at the top, so let's get them.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here. Mr. Clancy, how many times when did you get into the office? When did you become the acting director?
The acting director, October 6th, I believe. Yes.
October 6th
Of 2014.
of 2014. How many times have you appeared before Congress since then?
I believe this may be my 6th or 7th.
You know, I've been here since January 6th, and I think this is the 4th time I've seen you.
Yes,
I'm just, I mean, obviously, we got concerns here, and there seems to be an ongoing problem.
Yes.
As you might know, I'm very fortunate to have the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, my district. And I'm familiar with the training that takes place with the Secret Service agents down there, and I think they do an excellent job. But I also want to remind you of the Protective Mission Panel that came out and actually said that the amount of training that the Secret Service agents were getting was far below what it should be. In fact, I think at one time they said it was equaled only 25 minutes for each 1,300 uniformed officers.
Yes.
What are we doing to change that?
Well, you're absolutely correct, and I've been down to your Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and they do a great job down there, and they help us as we try to build our staffing levels. In terms of what we've done, Uniform Division 99% have gone through a building defense exercise training mission. It's a 10-hour block. Additionally, approximately 700 of our uniformed officers have gone through a 3-day training period where they do their firearms, their emergency medicine, their control tactics, a number of things. The agents on the President's detail, we've increased the number of agents on the President's detail. By the second quarter, early January, we will have increased the numbers there by 85, which is what was recommended by the Blue Ribbon Panel, and that will help their training. So we have increased training by 85% on the President's detail in this past year.
Okay, well, specifically, let's get to what we're here about today, and that is about Chairman Chaffetz and that situation. Inspector Roth has stated that several of the agents that violated the Secret Service and the Homeland Security policies when they accessed his records. This was a criminal offense, don't you think?
It is. It's on the books as a criminal offense, yes.
It's on the books as a criminal offense. Tell me what you've done. Had these people been fired? Have they been disciplined at any at all? A criminal offense by an agency that we hold to the highest standard. And, you know, earlier, I'm a little bit frustrated by some of the things I've heard here. Keep in mind that we up here are experts at spin and at pivoting. My campaign manager, that was his favorite word, pivot, pivot, pivot. And all of a sudden, I heard you talking about data, if the data had been better protected. Give me a break. If they wanted to see this, they were going to see it. I don't care how the data was protected. How can you let this go on? Why haven't you fired these people? They knew this was wrong. Don't you agree? Don't you agree? They knew this was wrong.
I do agree, and certainly there's misconduct here. The discipline has been proposed for those 15 and below, but the data is also important as a sidestep.
I understand that. I respect that, and I acknowledge that it is important that it be protected. But still, the basic premise here is that they knew what they were doing was wrong.
Yes.
And
Looking at the OIG report, they should have known what they were doing was wrong. And some of them, I think, will acknowledge. And
should have known? To an agency that we consider to be, to hold at the highest level? I just can't go along with that. I mean, even you yourself said it was inexcusable and unacceptable.
yes.
And it is, and it deserves discipline. Look, I'm a small businessman. I've got employees as well, and I can tell you when something like this happens, and I'm not trying to tell you how to run your business, but you know as well as I do that when you got a cancer, you got to get rid of it. Otherwise, it's going to destroy your whole business. And you've got to get rid of this cancer here, and you've got to set an example. And you've got an opportunity right here to set an example because what they did was wrong. They knew it was wrong, and they deserve discipline. And they deserve to be let go.
They deserve discipline. We do look at the whole picture here, too, the whole person. Some of these people have spent 28 years with no discipline in their history. Some of them self-reported. Some of them they're obviously all very remorseful. Was it was wrong? Yes, but we do look at the whole picture and the whole person of their career.
And I get that. I want to make sure that the punishment befits the crime, and I understand that. And you should look at their whole career. But at the same time, again, you've been here 6 times since you took office.
Yes.
We want you to succeed. We don't want to see you fail.
Yes.
We don't want to see you here anymore. Is essentially it. We want you to do this. We want you to do well. But we got to have your help. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Senator Langford.
Gentlemen, thank you. Long day. We still got a little ways to go and be able to bounce through some questions. I appreciate it very much. Let me just state a couple of things that I picked up from a lot of the conversation here today, and then I want to walk through multiple questions. There are a lot of issues with Secret Service. That's been well documented, and I want to talk about that in a little bit. I would say to you, I do disagree with one of the findings of the panel. I do think someone from the inside needs to be there to be able to fix it. Someone from the outside that doesn't have the same law enforcement background or doesn't have the same sense of corporate identity with the Secret Service walks in as an outsider and has a different opinion on it. Someone from the inside can walk in and say, I'm one of us and part of us and can turn some things around. So I appreciate that you're there, but there's obviously work to be done. And I'm going to come back to that in just a little bit. Mr. Roth, let me ask you a question. Is it your sense that for these individuals that access this database, it was the first time for them to access this database like this, or did anyone ever ask them, gosh, did you just happen to think, gosh, maybe I should go look at Jason Chaffetz's records? And someone said, well, I think maybe we could get access to that. Or did this look like this was a pattern of behavior that if they're interested in someone, they can go pull it?
I think it ran the gamut, depending on the agent we talked to. Some of them didn't think it was wrong at all because what they called it was our database. It was a Secret Service database, unlike NCIC or TAX or one of the other sort of larger criminal databases. This was run by the Secret Service and saw nothing wrong with it. Others didn't understand that it was wrong until after they did it, and then they realized, well, gee, I probably should not have done it.
But there's a training that happens multiple times a year. Both orally and electronically. There's your computer, when you start it up there, it says this is for official use only. It's still your perception that some individuals just kind of ignored all of that and said it's our database, we can do with it what we want.
That's correct.
Okay, well, the problem with that is if they can pull any member of Congress, if they can pull any individual there, that also means the new neighbor down the street, I can go check my records and see if there's something on the new neighbor down the street, when their daughter starts dating some new guy, they can go pull his family and go pull the records on it. If this is someone they don't like, they can pull the records. What we saw from the VA, and we'll talk about this with GAO in just a moment, but the VA became a whistleblower there, and we found other employees that were then just pulling records that were medical records on someone they didn't like as a whistleblower in the process. The challenge that we have here is access to data and what's official and non-official, and how do we actually track this? So based on your perception of walking through this with Secret Service, is it your perception this has been an ongoing issue for some employees just to be able to use that database as just, I can go look at it, whether it's official, non-official, and they blur those lines?
That's the sense we got from at least some of the agents that we interviewed who had access to the database.
Okay, Mr. Williamson, how do we deal with this? Social Security was identified 50 different individuals that were given merit bonuses at the end of the year, but also during the year had access to information for unofficial purposes and had looked people up. VA has this issue, which we can talk about at greater length, with someone grabbing information to be able to look at it. That's a whistleblower. How many agencies have good systems in place to be able to audit at least how individuals access these sensitive databases?
This particular access problem is probably the most common issue that we see when we're doing detailed information security audits. Too many people have access to things they don't need access to. It's not part of their job description. They don't have a need to know, but yet they're given access. So access is a real issue. It's one that I would say that's probably the most frequent one we come up with. Another issue that's interesting in this case is when you're collecting PII, one of the things you do is end up scheduling a records notice with NARA, National Archives and Records Administration, to, among other things, tell them how long you're going to keep the files before you dispose of it. I was kind of curious about why an application file from 2003 would be kept 12 years later. Those kinds of things should be disposed of fairly quickly. Right. And hopefully that's part of what the service will be doing going forward. You're supposed to schedule those records out and dispose of them at a certain date, sometimes 1 year, sometimes 5 years.
Can you pause on that, Mr. Clancy? Has that been taken care of at this point? There's two different sets of information here, both the electronic records that are not applicable anymore and paper records, because it's my understanding that there are still some offices that, though the access point has been changed electronically, if you go into a file room, those old application files may still be there in paper form as well. Has that been dealt with as well?
Yes, we are moving forward to, for example, with applicants, every 2 years, those files will be purged. Right now, there's an investigation going on with the Inspector General, so some of that will be delayed slightly until they're through the investigation, but that is the plan forward. And also, again, with the applicants in mind, 95% of the people that had access before no longer will have access because of the new system.
Is that both paper and electronic? For those offices around the country, do they still have access to paper records somewhere in a filing cabinet?
I'll have to get back to you with a good, solid answer on that. I think we've moved away from a lot of the paper, but let me give you a better answer.
Okay, that would be something wise to be able to evaluate as well. Yes, both the electronic version, the access point, and then obviously the paper version to make sure that that's also purged. It may be just if you have access to that room, you also have access to those files, and it's part of the challenge here. Let me come back to Mr. Williamson. Which agency would you identify and say, this agency is a good model example of how to handle personally identifiable information? They're auditing well, they're tracking well, they're a model agency.
Don't have one. No model agency.
That's somewhat depressing.
Yes, it is. Now, the more optimistic note, since the OPM cyber disaster, this has become a major priority. OMB has charged up its priority, definitely elevated its priority on this. Agency heads now recognize that this is a critical issue that needs to be addressed. You know, when we first announced the information security area as high risk, first few years I was told, you know, oh, you're Chicken Little, the sky is falling. I don't hear that anymore.
Sky fell.
Yeah.
Okay, so the challenge that we have here is dealing with, let me just give you one example of VA. This is something GAO has for years and years identified issues with VA.
Yes, sir.
How does this get better? How do we prevent unauthorized access of medical information and of private information for our veterans?
Veterans Affairs has a significantly high percentage of systems that are considered high-impact systems. That is, the disclosure of data or modification of the data because of the medical records is considered to be very severe in terms of its possible impact if it's lost, stolen, or reviewed by others. And given that, you have to put much stricter controls in place, including monitoring users and what they're doing, and if they have any atypical patterns in use. And
Is this just an audit, or is this an algorithm that's created?
this is an audit and algorithm. You can do it automatically.
Right.
And it's contained in National Institute for Standards and Technology guidance for high-impact systems. And like I say, VA has a significant percentage of high-impact systems where you've got to put these kind of controls in place to try to prevent the kind of situations that you described.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to, I don't know if we're going to do a second round of questions, but I do have additional questions for Director Clancy as well.
If you don't mind, I'll suspend it. Thank you, sir, and I will suspend your questions at the time and recognize Mrs. Watson-Coleman for a second round.
Mr. Chairman, you know, I know we were here. I know that my colleagues wanted us to sort of focus on what happened to Chairman Chavitz. I think if I were him, if I were he, I probably want this to go away now. Take care of the business that needs to be taken care of, discipline the people that need to be disciplined, learn the lessons that you need to learn. But, you know, I just really don't think he needs to have this or wants to have this as a continuing story. But it does speak to other issues that were identified. And it does speak to a culture or way of thinking or way of doing business or the way we perceive ourselves from the inside that needs to be addressed. And I know you have expectations for that changing. I'd like to know any steps that you're actually taking to change the culture in the form of action. What happens with your executive level? What happens with the level beneath that, the supervisory level? What happens with the rank and file level? How are you addressing the need to get our agency to think more differently about how we come to work, what we do at work? We don't sleep at work. We don't sex text under any circumstances. You know, we don't look into files that we don't have a responsibility or a need to look into. Is there going to be some sort of a fail-safe mechanism that shows when the file is being accessed by someone who shouldn't be or has no reason to be? I would like to know some steps that you're taking. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I just think in terms of the overall culture here, one of the things we're doing is we're trying to have our workforce take ownership of this agency. It's their agency. And let me just give you one example. Just 3 or 4 weeks ago, we started a new program. It's a crowdsourcing type of service on our intranet where our agents and our officers and all of our employees, professional staff, can send in ideas, suggestions, what we should be doing better, what should we be looking at. And then they get other people from the workforce looking at that, and they can like that, for a better term, and then it forces the executive staff to look at that. And we've seen this as a very positive already. Within a few weeks, we've had close to 200 hits of, we call it Spark, where people have taken ownership of their agency. And I think that's where we've got to get to that point. It is management, it's my leadership, but additionally, it's the individuals who have to take ownership of this agency. And I will say again, 99% of our people do have that ownership.
So, Mr. Clancy, I've been on the executive branch of government, and I know it takes that kind of expectation, but it takes a plan of action, and it takes whether or not you're hiring people from the outside who look at these issues and work through groups, and you work down through the organization. So at some point, I'd like to know if you're planning to do those kinds of action steps. And then the last question is, I really do want to know, is there some sort of way that there is a notification of accessing information when you're not, when it's out of order for what you're doing, it's not related to your case, your identification number to get into it signals whether or not you are or are not the right person to be accessing this information, as a follow-up to Senator Langford's concerns.
My understanding is, and the other gentleman here may be able to answer this better, but it requires constant monitoring and auditing, and there's no automatic notice that someone has accessed someone's data inappropriately. It has to be constant monitoring. Well, there's an administrator for each of these buckets of information, and that administrator has to control who has access, who has the need to know that information. So it's up to the administrator. So with our human resources, we have approximately 260 that would have access to our applicant data with this new system. And that administrator would have to ensure that anyone else who has access, they've approved.
Something, Mr. Ross,
If I
in
may,
response to this.
yes, if I may, just as an example, the DHS text system is one in which, for example, if Director Clancy had created a record there and then I accessed that record, Director Clancy would get an email that I was the one who accessed the record. So not only what Director Clancy was talking about, which is, you can run reports by the system administrator, but there are also sort of real-time controls on modern IT systems that weren't present in the MCI system.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair, thanks. The gentlelady from New Jersey. Chair recognizes the gentleman, Mr. Langford.
Thank you. And I think the audit system is going to be the key. Whatever percentage that is, to be able to have for this computer at this spot, here's everything that you ran, and that they know at some point someone's going to just spot audit. You can't go through all of it. There's not a need to go through all of it. But just the simple accountability that sits out there somewhere to know there's an algorithm that's running to say, hey, there's a search for files that don't seem to be consistent with official records. There's a spot audit occasionally that you may come in and face discipline saying you pull records from your neighbor down the street or from someone you don't like. All of those things, I think, just become important onto it. We have a tremendous number of people that work in the federal workforce that are great people that genuinely love the country and love to be able to do what their job is. The problem is these small, as Mr. Clancy, as you mentioned, the 1% on it. I had to smile as we were walking through some of the conversation about Secret Service and picking on Secret Service today. I hope we're really not picking on you. This has become the latest example of multiple examples, whether that be VA or Social Security or others, became this visual example again. But I have to tell you, as I've listened to some of the conversation on the dais about challenges with public relations nightmares and employees not doing their job and alcohol abuse and other thing else, we could, quite frankly, flip the tables and y'all could hold a hearing on members of Congress and have the same accusation. And I would assure you it's more than 1% of the members of Congress have some of these exact same issues. So this issue is a human behavior issue, but it's also a professionalism issue of taking the task seriously. So, Mr. Clancy, I'm going to give you an unfair list and just to be able to walk through a few things. And I'm going to tell you this in advance. As I have tried to start walking through some of the issues and the recommendations with Secret Service, it is the oldest general law enforcement entity in our country. It's an incredibly valuable resource to our nation. But my fear is some changes that have been put in place over the past several decades, it's not on your watch, have brought about some morale shifts on it. And what I'm trying to figure out is how do we shift morale back and how do we get on top of this? Otherwise, it's whack-a-mole with the different issues all the time. Overtime rules seems to come up over and over again as I talk to different agents and individuals, getting some sort of standard practice with their counterpart agencies. Accountability of leadership, so if there is a bad actor, everyone knows that's not tolerable in our agency. When you actually confront issues, everyone knows that's the standard and we're going to live up to it. If there is a bad apple, as has been stated in the group, or at some point that's flippant about it, everyone kind of works down to that level. Priority of new equipment and technology, I find that Secret Service is not getting the top priority for some of the newest technology and newest equipment among our DHS law enforcement, and I think that's demeaning. That sends a false message to Secret Service that they're not as valuable as some of the other aspects of DHS. Their responsibilities seem to be getting cluttered instead of a clarity where it has been historically for protection and for counterfeit duties. There seems to be other duties that seem to be kind of creeping into it that distract from the core mission here. The consistent career track seems to be a consistent theme that I've heard over and over again, that the career track seems to change, and so no one really knows what path they're on here. Am I off on any of these at this point?
No, you're correct, and I'll just comment on your last, the career track. We did bring in a workforce of agents at different levels to try to look at the best career track moving forward. And we have just announced a couple of months ago a new career track for our agents so that they can plan their future. That's been one of the problems. You don't know if you're going to come to Washington or will you be able to go to Texas. And so we're, again, listening to our workforce, trying to find solutions.
That's one of the things you can do if you're on the inside and you know full well what's happening, but I would encourage you in the career track, and you all have already examined this and go from there, the possibility that individuals that are on a previous career track still could finish that out.
Yes.
They could be grandfathered into that, or if they choose to shift to the other one, they could choose that as well. That gives them the option on it and feel like the new guy's got the new stuff or whatever it may be, but also have something to say, I started on this, I can actually complete this, and not feel like the rules are changing on me again as they walk through. This corporate identity is extremely important and is extremely valuable. And what I fear is that there's a growing sense of lack of importance of people that are incredibly important to our nation. I never want Secret Service folks to feel like they just guard doors for a living. They don't. They have an incredibly valuable role. And the morale and what you set and the role and the standard that you set will be incredibly important for years to come. If there is a silver lining in this, historically, Secret Service have had a really bad time when a president was shot. No one's been shot. There's just some things that were messed up. And this is a unique moment for publicly for the Secret Service to reevaluate again and go, who are we? Where are we going? What's our clear task? And I would encourage you, if there are issues in working with DHS and in the scheme of things, these committees need to know it. Because we want to make sure that all of the DHS families all feel equal levels of importance. Your Secret Service transition pretty quickly, I guess, from working in the Treasury to DHS and all the restructuring, and you're now one of many rather than the big dog at Treasury. And that has both benefits and challenges. And we need to know and to have some way to be able to help communicate in that so that we can help actually engage in this, because we're not only advocates, but we're accountability in the process. Today probably feels more like accountability, but we also have the desire to be advocates on these roles. So we'll need to know that. Is that fair?
That's fair, Mr. Chairman. If I could comment on one
Yes, sir.
thing there, sir. Just to give you some comfort, I know it's given me comfort, but I went through this papal visit as well as the UN. I traveled with the Pope, and I can tell you, as I talked to our agents, our officers, and our professional staff, this was a defining moment for our agency. As I talked to these people and I looked in their eyes, they wanted to be successful. They know the issues that have been highlighted, and rightfully so, over the past several years. This was an unprecedented time in our history, and our people were determined to make this successful. And we did this for NSSCs without incident. And our people felt very proud about that, and I'm very proud of our workforce. Now, having said that, we've got to correct these other things too, and we will. But we've got people that are working very hard for the American people.
Yeah, you do. And we acknowledge that, we understand that, but we also don't want anything to distract it.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Williamson, let me ask you this as well. When we're talking about databases and we're talking about access points, is there any independent agency or agency that's an executive agency that you think has a higher risk or has no system of tracking this, old or new, that you look at and say, these are the high risk, these are the highest risk? And part of my question are the independent agencies. Do we know for certain that they have auditing process because they handle incredibly sensitive financial data on Americans?
I would point to those agencies who have the most PII, personally identifiable information, as reason to make sure that they're doing everything they can to protect that. So you start with Social Security Administration, who has PII on almost every citizen. VA, you've already mentioned, definitely an issue. Department of Education, probably somewhat overlooked but they have a tremendous amount of PII because of student loans, not only on the student, but sometimes on the parents. So I would be most concerned about where the PII is the most significant.
Let me ask you about things like SEC or CFPB, fairly new entity for CFPB. They have a tremendous amount of data.
Yes.
Do we know on their employees how they have access and the limitations that they have?
We know that they have at least 3 sets of data collection that includes PII, maybe more. Arbitration case records, bank deposit account and transaction level data, and storefront payday loans.
What's their auditing process for their employees inappropriately accessing that?
That's something we can follow up on. We did make a recommendation in terms of we previously had done work, and we had made a recommendation related to their privacy impact assessment. Whenever you collect PII, you've got to do a privacy impact assessment that lets everyone know what are we collecting, why are we collecting it, how are we going to use it, how are we not going to use it, and when are we going to dispose of it. They had not fully done those when we had done our work, so we made a recommendation on that, and that's something I can follow up on and see where they're
I know
at.
CFPB has just requested, again, another incredibly large jump in the amount of information that they're gathering on Americans and gathering on databases. That seems to exceed even what was originally designed in Dodd-Frank.
Well, it may be more than what we had mentioned in our report then. They may have further expanded it.
It's a fairly recent expansion of requests for additional information. What we're trying to figure out is who has access to that, how often do they have access to that?
We can follow up for you on that.
Okay, that would be very helpful to this Congress.
Yes, sir.
Gentlemen, I thank you for your participation today.
Chair, thanks to gentleman from Oklahoma. Before I close out, I've got a couple questions. Mr. Williamson, you're from the Government Accountability Office, and I read through your information. I'm just wondering if you can provide any clarity on other agencies regarding penalties, regarding accountability for actions that have been that they've engaged in regarding security clearances. And I might be out of your wheelhouse, and if it is, that's okay.
Well, I can talk about numerous, some of the major incidents over time. Probably the first major incident we had with inappropriate browsing was at the IRS in the mid-90s. Several employees decided to start browsing celebrities' tax returns. And actually, as a result of that, there was an act passed, the Taxpayer Browsing Protection Act, 1997, and that, among other things, has penalties of up to a $1,000 fine and imprisonment of not more than 1 year.
Do you know if anybody was ever prosecuted under that and was subjected to those penalties at all?
Do not know that, sir, but we can follow up on that with IRS.
Well, I wish you would, just so we know. And Director, you also mentioned that I think there are some limitations, right, to what you can do regarding accountability, regarding punishment for actions that are beneath the standard. Is that correct?
Yes, we're not able to fire at will. Yes.
You're not, okay, so we need to know, the members of this board and Congress in general needs to know what you need us to do for you to be successful, for you to manage your force, okay? We need your direct recommendations, and that's, as I've said so many times in the room, we want you to be successful, and if we're standing in the way, you need to let us know what we can do, what we should do so that you can be successful. I've served for over 30 years in the United States military, if you're familiar with the Army, and I can guarantee you if there's a question of your security clearance and your activities regarding the security clearance, that is suspended on an interim basis pending an investigation. And if you're found to have been at fault and have breached it, it's very serious. It is incredibly serious for the most minor infractions. And it's not meant to be a culture of punishment and fear, but it's meant to keep honest people honest and to raise to the level of importance those things that should be important. And I would just suggest that maybe that'd be something that you might want to look at for suspension of security clearances, which I would imagine in your business, a suspension of a security clearance, certainly on an interim basis, or maybe on an interim basis, but absolutely on a permanent basis, means loss of employment because you can't be employed without it, right? And
That's correct, yes, sir.
That's correct, right? So that gets to where we want to be. I would also say this, in looking at some of the testimony, we're concerned about how fast you're getting the information. You're the top dog and you're in charge and I get it. But I will tell you this too, whether it's in my family or whether it's in the military or whether I was running my business, bad information, bad news does not get better with time. There must be a culture of something happened and who needs to know, and we get the information up to the top of the chain as quickly as possible because you've got to be able to do your job. You can't do it without the information. If your subordinates don't know that that is your expectation, then we're going to have this continuation of this, which none of us want. You're sitting here in front of us and you're defending your agency and your agents as we expect you to, as you should. And you'll probably also know that 95% of your time will be spent on 5% of your people. Director, I've been out to your operation, and I have been well impressed. And all of us really want to hold up the Secret Service as the standard. We want that. Americans really desperately want that. And so these things are incredibly hurtful when we hear them in the news. They are hurtful. There's a bigger picture here, and I think your agents, your employees need to understand it is not their system. It is the taxpayers' database, and it is not their information. It is those individuals' information. You don't own it. Those individuals own it, and to use it willy-nilly is reprehensible in an age when, as the senator talked about, all these the information that the government's gathering, the information that the private sector is gathering, and what happens to it, and who owns it, and the force of law under the ACA, which says you must submit your information to think and to wonder that somebody might be using that for their personal whatever. That's a problem. That's a problem for the American citizen trusting their government, and your employees have a direct connection to that. They must, in my opinion, they must understand that. I want to just speak to this. You've been questioned a couple times on diversity and also on filling your ranks and keeping your people employed and keeping them incentivized and so on and so forth. We understand that you have challenges, just like everybody does, complying with the law and filling your ranks with the people that you want to have there. We understand that. I would say from this person's perspective, I want you to get the best.
Yes.
You get the best, all right? You get the best to do the job. Finally, I noticed a couple times you said you were trying to be consistent with other agencies. And I will tell you this, sir. I understand where you want to be. But this is the Secret Service, the premier organization of your type in the United States government, in the world. How about if you lead? If you can't find somebody that meets the standards you want to set in your agency around the government agencies, go outside or make your own standard. If you need help from us, you need to ask for it. All right? Thank you very much for your time here. Gentlemen, again, I thank you, the witnesses, all for your very valuable testimony and for the members and their questions. Members may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask that you respond to those in writing. Without objection, this subcommittee stands adjourned.